Describe your first encounter with General Gray. Was it memorable?
It was. I mean, I was a first lieutenant company commander in 2nd Battalion, 2nd Marines. We had deployed in an operation back then called Beauregard Northern Wedding. That was a 3-month deployment. We operated in the Netherlands, Germany, and for a brief period of time in Norway. In any event, then one star, who I'd never seen before in my life, Al Gray, was the commander of all of that. And when we landed in the Netherlands and did several days of training and, war games and whatnot, tanks and all sorts of armored vehicles and whatnot. And then some of us were, as the rest of the unit moved to Germany, which was a several-day cycle, because again, moving tanks and things like that, had to get them up on rail cars and whatnot. But some of us then flew forward to the training area with the Germans to, start to get acclimatized, if you will. And so anyway, we're waiting. I'm waiting in a LZ farmer's field somewhere in the Netherlands, and waiting to get picked up by a helicopter. And dark, and someone sat down next to me. I knew just by his voice that he was older than me, but I didn't know who he really was. And we talked for a long, long time about maneuver and warfare and all of this kind of thing. And again, didn't know who it was until I then get on the helicopter and there was some lighting and I saw that he was a brigadier general. So that's my first time I ever met General Gray. And again, for a guy that senior to take as much time as he did, of course, we were both laying there waiting for a helicopter, so he had plenty of time on his hands. But to talk about things like tactics and whatnot with someone who he really didn't know who I was either, it was a great experience anyways. And so that was really the first time I met General Gray, first of many, many times after that.
What is it about General Gray that puts him in a league all his own?
Well, and it's certainly one of the things that I caught on to pretty quickly with him and tried to emulate. But he wasn't the only one that did this, what I'm about to describe, but he certainly did it in spades. And that is, even though he's a general, a colonel, eventually a 4-star general, he never put on airs. He never parked in the general-only parking space. I'm kind of making that up, but he just and he was out and about all the time. I mean, again, he could have had he owned the entire Marine unit that was out there. He could have had a Huey pick him up on the boat or on the beach and fly him to Germany, but no, he waited it was rainy and cold, and he waited there with all the rest of us to a couple of 53s come in to take us to Germany. I didn't have to do that, but he did it, and that's classic him. I know he was always out kicking tires, in operations, training operations in Camp Lejeune. Again, he'd pop up in the strangest places because he was out seeing what was really going on. And it's certainly a lesson that, again, I learned that lesson early on from a number of really great Marines, but I remember that most about him. You carry your own bag, set up your own tent, make your own coffee, and see to the troops. Because if you see to the troops, they'll do anything you want them to do. And we're all troops at one time in our life. I was a 4-star general. And technically speaking, I was a troop too, to the President of the United States. But you take care of your people, they'll take care of you. And that's the kind of thing that General Gray did in spades.
What do you, in your own words, what do you think the legacy of General Gray will be for the Marine Corps?
I think a lot, but I think and most Marines today didn't go through this experience, but the maneuver warfare, the change of the Marine Corps into we'd always been, and this is very counterintuitive to an awful lot of people. The Marine Corps has this, and we like this image of ourselves as being, cavemen, dumb as rocks, but really, really tough guys. We are really, really tough guys and gals. But we're also a very intellectual organization. If you consider the fact that at the end of World War I, the one thing that came out of that war, one of the many things that came out of that war was amphibious operations are absolutely impossible to do. Drawn on the on the lessons of Gallipoli and the Australians and New Zealanders. And the one thing that came out of that is you cannot do amphibious operations. Well, during the 20s and 30s, Marines studied that over and over and over and over again, and intellectually studied it, and came up with a way around the problems that the Australians and the New Zealanders couldn't overcome. There's no better example than that. The most fortified place on the planet in the history of mankind was Iwo Jima. And the Marines went ashore there, terrible casualties, but went ashore there and did the impossible. We did the impossible at Tarawa. We did the impossible in Okinawa alongside our Army brethren. Different parts of the island were different in terms of the Marines and the Army. But the point is, we come from a very intellectual tradition. And but again, we don't like to tell people that because we like the caveman thing. I think if you look at the Vietnam War, the Marines went in, evaluated the situation, and said, we know how to fight this war, and began to fight an insurgency war. The folks, the senior leaders in Saigon said, no, we want you to fight what I'll term a conventional war. We're like, but this isn't a conventional war. This is a insurgent war. No, we want to fight you a conventional war. So we went from fighting the war, very well characterized in Bing West's, former Marine, his book, The Village, and being very effective in our zones in terms of getting at the Viet Cong, and to things didn't go so well because we fought the war differently than what the war needed to be fought. So this intellectual approach is very common to the Marine Corps. And I think all that leads up to General Gray and maneuver warfare. From very early on in my career, even as a sergeant, I was encouraged to read. But particularly when I became a junior officer, there were several people in my life, Marine officers, that said, read, study it. If you don't study it, if you don't understand it, then if you go to war, you could make mistakes. And when you make mistakes in war, it usually means young men and women die. So study it. You wouldn't go to a doctor that didn't study his whole life in whatever part of medicine he was an expert. Go into the journals and reading the journals and all that. So I did that, and I was a big reader and whatnot, which was fairly unusual at the time. But anyways, that's what I did. I could also max the PFT. I could also, go 25-mile humps and not even think about it. But General Gray brought this maneuver warfare thinking, and there were cells of people that even long before General Gray became the commandant, there were cells of people that were meeting, not clandestinely, but just together to discuss a couple hours a week or 2 or 3 times a month about maneuver and all this, and things to read about how the Germans fought in World War I, how the Germans fought in World War II, how we fought and did what we did. And even in the island campaigns where there was not much room for maneuver on places like Tarawa, we still overcame the defenses by thinking about how to overcome the defenses. But the point is, anyways, when he came on board, he wanted to bring this maneuver warfare in philosophy into the Marine Corps. And a lot of people were against it. A lot of, I can remember as an example, at the time I was a major running the infantry officer course, and there were people that at Quantico that were in the so-called education sections that were saying, look, we think General Gray's wrong. Second lieutenants are not supposed to think. They're supposed to do what they're told. Sergeants don't have to think. They have to do what they're told. Why are we teaching a private, as we change boot camp, why are we teaching privates to think they don't have to think? Well, if you know your history, the strength of some of the greatest militaries in the world, and I'll use the German Army again, World War I, World War II, is that they powered down and the use of initiative was expected. Oftentimes, you used to hear the term, you probably still do, but good initiative,
Bad judgment.
Bad judgment. Well, if someone exercises initiative, we can talk about the end result of what happened, but you should never link good initiative with bad. Initiative is always good, so long as the person is exercising the initiative based on the mission orders of the commander or his boss, whoever his boss happens to be. But there were a lot of people pushing back on General Gray, and he He did a lot of smart things. He went to the basic school first in IOC, Infantry Drives and Corps, as part of that. And he said, if we could change the lieutenants, we're probably not going to change the colonels and the generals and maybe not even the majors and lieutenant colonels, but we can change the lieutenants. They quickly become captains and then majors. And so we changed. He came down to the basic school shortly after he was the commandant. And he said to then Colonel Terry Everett, who's a great Navy Cross, retired as a colonel, great American, and said, I want you to start to implement maneuver warfare thinking, training, whatnot here at the basic school. And it was funny, most of the senior people, I was probably the junior person in the room as a major. And when the door closed, and I want you to develop a reading list for all Marines. And when he left, Colonel Everett looked at me and said, looked at the group and said, does anyone really know what he's talking about? And I said, I think I do, sir. And he said, good. And you're also the only person I know that reads a lot. So can you develop this list? And I said, sure, I can do that. And so that began the process. Funny, on the list, I went home and I copied down about 300 books in my own personal library, but I did them on 3x5 cards. And then went to work the next day and they said, hey, okay, good. Take this list up to General Gray. He's a commandant of the Marine Corps. I mean, I'm a major. I didn't even know how to get to headquarters Marine Corps. But I went up there and he said, this is a great list. Put them, and that's why I put them on the 3x5 cards. He said, put them like, what should a sergeant read? What should a corporal read? And I suggested, I think the same things a sergeant corporal should read is what the lieutenant should read. And I think what the captain reads is the same thing with the gunny, and the gunny should read. And you see the point. And that started, I mean, that list came out and was required. I know it's different now, but that's how all that started. But the point is, he changed the Marine Corps, and he did it with a lot of pushback. As I say, there were an awful lot of people saying, again, why do enlisted people have to think? They just have to know how to follow orders. No, not if you want to be really, really good. And I remember in 2003, I was the assistant division commander for the 1st Marine Division. We went we invaded Iraq. General Mattis was my immediate boss. And a lot of people don't know this, but the distance the 1st Marine Division we went from the border between Iraq and Kuwait. Think of that as the coast of Normandy. And at the end, we were in a place, I happened to be privileged to be the unit commander of Task Force Tripoli. That was all of the LAVs, light armored vehicles. By the way, a program that General Gray brought into the Marine Corps. Again, a lot of people said, we don't need LAVs. We're wasting our money. A brilliant move on General Gray's part to add maneuver. But in any event, we went to a place called Beji, and that's where we ended the war. That's as far as the U.S. Army went in World War II, from the shores of Normandy to the River Elbe when the war ended. And pretty good for a Marine Corps that's not really supposed to operate very well past 25 miles from the ocean. Not bad. And we did all of that in less than 40 days. So, but when I came back, I was one of the first people to rotate back and also one of the first people to rotate back over. But I went through Bethesda because we had wounded Marines there. And I went up, it was a Sunday morning, to visit the Marines. There were a lot of parents there. There were several Gold Star parents there. And but I ran into General Gray, who was there. And I said, sir, just like you said, it was like watching a movie. We went through them, like shit through a goose. They didn't know what was happening to them. And we did it mostly with maneuver and firepower. If you do it just with firepower, so many more people are going to die. But we did it with maneuver, moving around the battlefield, making the Iraqi units in many cases irrelevant because we left them alone. But we told them as we went by, no better friend, no worse enemy. If I were you, I'd go home. But if you don't want to go home, we'll come back to see you. But it was all done largely by maneuver. Firepower for sure, but and it was Al Gray that brought that to the Marine Corps, into America.
You're in a unique position as a chief of staff in the Trump administration. Anything from General Gray that you took with you as chief of staff?
How to maneuver. A different kind of maneuver. Maybe a better way to put it is how to outmaneuver. And one of the things as Marines that we learn pretty early on, we learn people. We do it without even thinking about it. We evaluate people, look at them very quickly, get to know them, get to know what makes them tick, and then deal with them, because everyone's an individual. One person you can motivate in a certain way, another person doesn't react to that kind of thing, but is motivated in another way. It's called leadership, frankly. You treat people with dignity and respect, all that, but you also understand what makes them tick. And if you do that, then you can help them come to the right conclusion. So that was a big part of my Marine training that I applied. I don't know how to do anything else. But this issue of outmaneuvering people was something that I learned in the Marine Corps. Certainly General Gray taught in maneuver warfare, and I was able to apply it to good effect more than once.
Anything else you'd like to add?
No, again, I would just end by saying General Gray not only is a wonderful guy, wonderful man, wonderful leader, Marine's Marine, he really did change the Marine Corps for the better in so many ways. Not that we were bad before, we just got better. And a lot of it just had to do with some personnel changes, the way we turned education into real education as opposed to training, which is also important. But it's two different things. The pushing down of power and initiative to enlisted Marines, or junior Marines, and that's a relative term, but certainly the lieutenants, the captains, and all enlisted. He had a lot of confidence in the ability of Marines, if they were trained properly, if they had the right mindset, if they were supported. You remember that old, again, back to that good initiative, bad judgment. If you say that to someone, then they're not going to apply initiative anymore, because but the best way, and the way we started implementing training, was we would have people do things, and then if it was a brilliant success, say, okay, great, why did you do it exactly that way? What made you think that way? If it didn't work out so well in training, you'd say, okay, what would you have done different? What would you have put the machine guns differently? Would you have taken a different route into the enemy positions? It's all a learning experience. And again, I spent a fair amount of time in Iraq and Afghanistan. I routinely, based on his lesson and the lessons of others like him, I would routinely show up unexpectedly just before patrols would go out over the wire and go with them as a 1-star and as a 2-star. And the sergeant in charge would go, "Sir, what are you doing here?" I'd say, "No, I just want to go walking with you." And just watching that Marine unit operate and how they did business, you learn so much about the unit and how well it's trained, what its morale is. Talk to individual Marines. They have no idea they're telling you things that are so incredibly important. When they gripe about something, all Marines are going to gripe about not enough this, that, or the other thing. But when every now and then you detect something that's fairly serious, and you go, okay, you don't say anything to him, you don't say anything necessarily to the commander, but maybe go to the battalion commander and say, that unit's getting tired, maybe you ought to give them a break or something. It's just something like that. But I always called it, leadership by kicking the tires, looking behind the dumpsters. That's the kind of thing I learned from people like General Gray, and I think that's part and parcel of the Marine Corps today. So he's a great man, and I'm glad to be here on his 95th birthday.